real quick, a sample of an option in a lease is, hey, this is a 5-year lease, but 6 months prior to my lease expiration, if I let you know I want to extend for another 5 years at that rate we discussed in the beginning, which is typically always at the advantage of the tenant because inflation's a bitch, then they get to accept that. They send you a letter and it says, hey, we're going to accept that option, and our rent's going to be cheap. But if they didn't have that option, their rent may be way more. It could be way more.
Yeah, it's really locking you in and giving flexibility to the tenant. Because the tenant's only going to take that if they can't find better space for cheaper. And so did you limit your negotiation by allowing them to have that option?
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan of options. People, I think landlords like to offer them, but for me, because they think, I got these options lined up for this tenant. I don't think that at the end of the 5 years, either the business is working or it's not working. And so if it's not working, it doesn't matter how many options you have, they're not going to take it. And if the business is working, don't you want a chance to maximize the value in year 5?
Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back to How to Invest in Commercial Real Estate. Today is an exciting episode. We are talking about commercial retail lease renewals. And lease renewals as an owner is really where you get to impart value, because a lot of the times, you're buying a shopping center, you're buying an existing lease that's already intact. It's a good investment, but you can't just go restructure those terms in the middle of it. That's a contract, that's an obligation. So you've got to wait until that lease expires. And then at that point, you really get the opportunity to go to the tenant and work out something new on a mutually beneficial term, I guess. So today is all about the top 5 ways to maximize value in lease renewals.
Before we get started, let me ask a question. Do we always want to take care of the lease renewals? Does a management company ever do it? What's our stance on that, do you think?
That is a great question. A lot of management companies do it. Most management companies take care of lease renewals. I like to take care of my lease renewals because I'm partial. I think I do a better job than they do. A manager is typically working for a fee on a lease renewal, which is fine. But I'm owning the property, and you can add, potentially millions of dollars of value, or just save yourself little heartaches along the way by reading the lease, understanding the lease, and getting those points in. And a broker may just be pushing for the highest rent and the longest lease term to get the biggest fee. That's what they're incentivized to do. So
they're not incentivized to maximize profit for lease renewals like we're going to talk about today, right? Really, they just want their percentage.
They want the highest monthly rent possible for the longest term because that's what their commission's based on. Yeah, 100%.
All right, I have a couple thoughts on that. I think handling your own renewals does 2 things. First is you negotiate that out of a management company's scope, and now you're going to collect the real estate commission, let's say, or the fee based on that renewal. Yeah. So I don't see a reason to pay that to a third party unless it's just in a market that you are out of touch, you don't have any knowledge of, and you already have someone handling the management, and you say, hey, okay, handle the leasing renewal. But when you think about renewing leases, let's say it's a 5-year renewal, and let's say the rate is $15 a foot per year, and it's 3,000 feet. I'm not going to do the math, but 90% or 95% of that total that you're going to pay that commission on is just that $15. So the person that's handling the renewal for you, whether they get $15.30, $15.50, $16 on the renewal versus $15, doesn't change their commission but a couple of percentage points. Right. But it really changes the value of your asset. Like we've talked about in previous episodes, increasing the rent drastically increases the value of your property. And I'll give you an example, and we'll talk about it later. So every dollar that you increase your NOI, if you plan on selling at a 7 cap, you get $14 on your exit. Wow. Okay. And so the person that's renewing for you, that's getting a fee that doesn't really change whether they get a little more or a little less, is just no one's going to handle that lease renewal like an owner that's trying to maximize value. Yeah. It just isn't going to happen. So today we want to help you focus on how do you take control if you do own and maximizing value when you do your lease renewals. And we want to encourage you to do your own lease renewals.
All right.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest ones is getting tenants to pay a proportionate share of the costs associated with the center. And very easily stated, that's called the triple nets of the deal. The triple nets are the common area maintenance, the insurance on the property, and the property taxes for the property. So it's very normal for them to take a proportionate share of those expenses. If you have 10,000 feet and 100,000 square foot center, you should pay 10% of those associated expenses. But again, like we discussed in the beginning, a lot of the times you're inheriting these leases. You're buying them already in place, so that may not be there. And that's an easy way to maximize value. And it's just an easy argument to be had. Pay the triple nets, pay your associated expenses.
Yeah, and so let's talk about why that's an important factor. Like you say, we've purchased properties where mom and pops have owned, and the leases are all over the board. There's no standard. Some tenants may cover, HVAC. Sometimes the tenant will cover the landlord will cover the first $1,000 of the HVAC, and then the tenant covers. Sometimes they cover roof structure, parking. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they cover the taxes, insurance. Sometimes they don't. And so what it makes it hard is to figure out what the actual NOI is. And so when you have an asset that you're going to take to market, eliminating any guesswork on what the NOI is going to be, and eliminating any risk to a potential buyer on increasing costs is going to help maximize the value of your property. And so what we're talking about here is getting the tenant to sign up, say, okay, we're switching you from a double net to a triple net, which means kind of all incurred expenses are now your proportionate share. What that does is then as those costs go up, real estate taxes, insurance, common area maintenance, that burden falls back on the tenants collectively.
Right.
And so it eliminates that risk for the landlord going forward that's going to negatively impact his NOI. So it allows someone that's looking at purchasing it to really hone into his NOI.
Yeah, so there's different ranges of triple net, right? I mean, there's kind of an absolute triple net where if anything happens to that building, the tenant occupying it is covering it, and that's what you would see on like a
single tenant net lease.
Yeah, really popular.
Like an Arby's out parcel. It's maybe an absolute net. Anything with that property, they cover. Landlord covers nothing.
So do you have to have that in the lease, whether it's an absolute net or triple net? You still have to describe what that means, right? In
Absolutely.
The lease,
a lot of times, absolute triple nets are absolute because the tenant does everything themselves. So they pay the property taxes directly. They get insurance on the property directly and submit proof that it was done. They take care of common area maintenance and handle it directly. A triple net tenant in a shopping center may pay for all of the triple nets, their taxes, their insurance, common area maintenance, but they're handled by the landlord. That takes a lot of time. You've got to go negotiate landscapers and take care of the roof and the maintenance and pay property taxes. Those need to be disputed almost every single year. You've got to get good insurance. You've got to get good insurance that isn't ridiculously expensive. And again, there's a lot of value to be had there. So in exchange for that, it may not be unreasonable to start adding a fee on the triple nets. That's starting to become more and more common.
And we do that. We add an administration fee of maybe 10 or 15% for us handling all the expenses, prorating the shares out.
Yeah, right.
And so that's an important part of it.
It is.
Okay. So what if the tenant says, yeah, my rent is $14 and now you want to add $4 more in triple nets? That's a 25% increase. I can't stomach that. For us, we realize that may be a burden too much. And so we may say, okay, your rent was 14 and there's $4 of triple nets. We'll go ahead and bill you now. We're going to move it down to $11.50.
Okay.
We're still going to put those $4 on there. So your total effective rent is going to be $15.50, but it's really $11.50 for the base plus those triple nets.
Yeah.
And so that gets them to be able to stomach it, but going forward, it helps you maximize his value.
Yeah,
and it's just easier on the landlord and the investor to project cash flow. You don't have the swings of these repairs because the property is paying them over the year, but then it's reconciled. So the tenants are just paying the actual cost.
Their prorated share, sure. Okay, the next area that we want to talk about, and it's been a big one for us, is annual compounding increases. You will get pushback from tenants that don't want this. They don't want any increase, and they don't want annual increases. What we see a lot is people saying, "Oh, well, okay, we'll go flat for 5 years, and then we'll give you a 10% bump in year 6." We want to encourage you not to do it that way. we think that annual small 2 to 3% annual increases every year is the best way to go. As you're waiting, the rent staying the same for 5 years and inflation is going up, why keep your income stagnant? Hit them with the 2% annual compounding. Not only will your rent be higher in year 6 if you do it that way, but each year your rent is higher.
Right.
So you're getting a lot more profit along the way. And the tenant, they're not really going to differentiate that much the difference. 2% a year versus inflation, which is higher. They're going to be like, oh, okay, that seems reasonable. 3% compounding. To them, they don't understand how fast that's compounding. And so for us, that's been a great tool to maximize value. And then going back to at a 7 cap, every dollar you're getting on that increase is worth 14 on the exit.
Well, and that's right. And if you decide to sell within those 5 years, then your NOI is higher in one particular year, and you'll get a higher sales price, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one.
Any other thoughts? Besides this should be a definite focus.
It's probably the most important point out of the 5. It should have been number 1 in hindsight, but it doesn't matter. Getting more rent is the most important thing in any asset class, whether it's an apartment, it's industrial, it's retail. That's what's driving the value increase of the property. So you're assuming a sale at some point. You're assuming a higher sale at some point, and the only way you get that is compounding annual rent growth. It's the only way.
All right, so then you can get annual increases on the renewals, but another one, our third point, is always be willing to consider tenant improvement dollars in exchange for higher rent.
Right. And
so a lot of the tenants, their business is doing well, and let's say they're paying $15 a foot in rent, and they could probably pay 16, 17, 18, but they're not going to pay any more than we make them. But let's say they're like, hey, I'm going to sign a 5-year renewal. What's in it for me? I'd like to, fix this place up. I'd like to put some new light fixtures, some new flooring, some paint. Maybe you say, okay, I'll offer you $10 a foot in TI. So let's say it's a 2,500 square foot space. You're going to offer them $25,000 in TI, tenant improvement allowance dollars. Mm-hmm. And you say, okay, Mr. Tenant, this lease is 5 years. So why don't we do this? I'll give you the $25,000 interest free, and you just pay, instead of $15, you pay $17 for the next 5 years. That way I get my $10 back. You get interest free loan money that you can fix up your space, and it's a net zero for both of us.
Yeah. But you keep saying fix up, their space, but at the end of the day, it's our space. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're giving them money to invest in your building.
For sure. And is it net even? Did it all shook out? Is it even?
No. Really.
It's not even. Yeah. Okay. And why is it not even? You gave $25,000 to them, and you got $25,000 in extra rent over the next 5 years. But here's the thing: is if you go to sell anytime in that next 5 years, you're getting $2 more in rent.
Right.
Times 2,500 is $5,000. Times 14 on a 7 cap, and it could be an 8 cap, and that's maybe 11 or 12 times. But let's just take 5,000 times 14. You're $70,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In additional, and you're still getting your 25,000 back.
Yeah. Right.
And another thing to keep in mind is at the end of that 5 years, now instead of paying 15, guess what they're used to paying? 17.
Yeah. Right.
And so now you can really leverage that they're already okay paying 17. You're not going to go back to 15.
Right.
Their business can handle 17. So now you're going to start annual increases on that 17 number. So you see you're winning on a couple different fronts and giving them some TI dollars, selling it to them as an interest-free loan to fix up their space. But you're getting the benefit on the back, or potential benefit on the back end.
Right.
It's an easy trap to fall into, because if you've ever looked at buying a Starbucks or a Chipotle or any other major brand, the rent is going to be astronomically high because all of the costs associated with that building are baked into the rent. And when you look, okay, worst case scenario, what happens if this tenant leaves? Which you should ask yourself that question if you're buying something. What happens if the tenant leaves? Are you going to backfill it for that amount of money per foot? If Starbucks is leasing for you for $36 a foot, you're probably not going to get another coffee shop to pay $36 a foot because it's already built out as a coffee shop. it doesn't work.
Yeah, so be careful when you're buying a property where the rents are based on large TI contributions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Because it may be artificially high compared to the market, and when that lease is up, that tenant may balk, say, "Hey, this rent is too high," or you may have a hard time backfilling.
Yeah.
Okay. Point 4 is let's talk about options. I see too many landlords that fall in love with giving tenants options as if it's a benefit to them. And I don't see it as a benefit.
Is it ever a benefit for the landlord?
I don't think it is, because let's say a tenant goes 5 years and they want an option to renew. Even if I say, hey, I'm gonna gouge them, man. In 5 years, I'm gonna give them an option that's 30% higher than today.
Yeah, well, they can renegotiate it, right?
They can renegotiate. They can say, you know what, I don't want that option.
Yeah.
I'm out. I got a place down the street. The option holds no real value to a landlord because the tenant doesn't have to take it.
So let's real quick. A sample of an option in a lease is, hey, this is a 5-year lease, but 6 months prior to my lease expiration, if I let you know I want to extend for another 5 years at that rate we discussed in the beginning, which is typically always at the advantage of the tenant because inflation's a bitch, then they get to accept that. They send you a letter and it says, hey, we're going to accept that option, and our rent's going to be cheap. But if they didn't have that option, their rent may be way more. It could be way more.
Yeah, it's really locking you in and giving flexibility to the tenant. Because the tenant's only going to take that if they can't find better space for cheaper. And so did you limit your negotiation by allowing them to have that option?
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan of options. I think landlords like to offer them, but for me, because they think, I got these options lined up for this tenant. I don't think that at the end of the 5 years, either the business is working or it's not working. And so if it's not working, it doesn't matter how many options you have, they're not going to take it. And if the business is working, don't you want a chance to maximize the value in year 5?
Yeah.
Because let's say the market is doing really, really well, but you've already predefined your option, so you can't take advantage of it. And let's say the market is doing terrible, and you're like, well, I don't want to negotiate a new lease when the market's doing terrible, so I want to have options available. Well, he's not going to take your option if the market's terrible, right? He's going to negotiate something else anyway. So it just isn't really a benefit.
Do the tenants come to you very often asking for options? Maybe the sophisticated ones do?
Every day.
Yeah, the good ones should. They should want to limit exposure in the future. So yeah, they want the options. So what I'm proposing is, if you're going to do options, be aggressive. Be really aggressive, because it's only a benefit to the tenant.
Yeah, okay.
So I have a different way. I just do fair market value options. It's so much easier, because it's like, hey, if you want to renew, if you want a 5-year option to renew, I mean, it's basically worthless at that point. Like, what is a 5-year option at fair market value? I mean, I guess you can put in...
It's pretty subjective.
It is pretty subjective, because what happens if you don't reach a conclusion on fair market value? What happens if you don't agree? I mean, you're basically just saying, hey, I want a meeting that's pre-designated to negotiate this.
I think it's okay to do that, because in 98% of cases in the future, the fair market value of that rent is going to be higher than today. So you're going to get an increase most of the time. And like you say, if push comes to shove, let's say the market isn't as good, you're at the end of the 5 years and the fair market value is less, you can still argue about what that fair market value is, to the point that you can potentially get better than fair market value by just not agreeing. And some tenants may make you come up with a sophisticated appraisal process, which kind of locks you in. But worst case, you could do a fair market value that at least will take care of inflation.
Yeah.
And that sometimes will, in the tenant's mind, fair market. Okay, well, that's fair. Fair is fair. It says it's fair right in the term.
Yeah.
And so they'll kind of go ahead and let you do that, versus locking yourself into something worse.
Right. It makes me want to call the other option an unfair option.
Yeah.
If the tenants are allowed to say it's not fair, sometimes it can be unfair for the landlord. If you got, 2 10-year options in your initial 10-year lease term, and we're 30 years down the road, and your rent is just pre-negotiated at a stupid low rate, that's unfair for the landlord. If you want to talk about fairness.
Yeah, and we have some tenants like that, and we've had some big national retailers that have tried to lock us into 30 years of options with literally like 20% increase over 30 years. So let's say the rent is $10 today per foot. In 30 years, that should be $25 or $30. I mean, I don't know in 30 years what the market's going to do. Just think about
13.
what prices were back in 1985.
Shit, dude, think about what prices were 6 months ago.
Yeah, and so and they want literally 5 or 10% increases every 5 or 10 years, and so it's just not a good situation to lock yourself into that.
You have to realize that those people negotiating those options are probably better at lease negotiating than you, because they're negotiating leases for 1,000 stores across the U.S. and all they do is negotiate Hobby Lobby leases. Right. I mean, those people are asking for the moon, because worst case scenario, you say no.
Yeah, and the big companies, they're just really good because of their leverage and their credit, and the desire for people to have, let's say, a Hobby Lobby or whatever, is that they will just stand their ground against you trying to negotiate a realistic, lease schedule. And so we've just had to tell them take a hike, but I know a lot of people do agree to it. All right, last one of the 5 is lease term. So the normal thinking of a landlord is, hey, I want to get the longest lease term possible.
As long as possible.
That's really what people say and what people think. Now, what happens if you're going to do that? Have you won? What security did you actually buy yourself? To me, not that much. I mean, especially if you're talking about second generation mom pop type retail businesses, restaurants and things. That's what we're talking about. Obviously, if you lock in
multifamily is another one. Large scale residential housing is another one.
Yeah. I mean, for us, so if I lock in a small retail tenant for 10 years, now I've paid 10 years of commission on that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And my question is, what did I actually do for myself? Because if the tenant bails, let's say the tenant's business doesn't work and they're a mom and pop and they're done in year 3. How does that help me that I got a 10-year lease? It doesn't help me at all.
Do they ever have personal guarantees on those leases where you could collect, or is it always the company goes under and it's gone?
You can if they have. Sometimes we have personal guarantees, but how much is that personal guarantee worth? How hard is it to go after them for the money if their business is failing at a 2,500 square foot retail shop selling donuts?
Yeah.
Like, how much do you think that they're going to have for you to go after?
Right.
Not that
good
much.
Point. Yep.
Okay, so the flip side to how I think about it is I kind of want shorter leases, especially on new tenants that I'm not sure if they're going to make it. Because for me, they're not going to be willing to pay as much per foot when they're first starting out, because they're wary of their business working. And so okay, I'll get them a rate that gets them in there at $12 a foot. But if their business works and they're making money, they can afford $18 a foot in rent. And so I want that chance in year 3 to evaluate how well they're doing and to really go after a large increase once their business is established. But if I get a 10-year lease on a new tenant, to me, I've unless I get just really strong increases, which is unlikely, I've limited myself on the upside. If their business, I'll give you an example. I've done this. Marijuana business went into one of our centers, and they had the leverage. I had a large vacancy, and they locked me in to a 10-year lease, and I think I only got 1 or 2% increases. Their business is absolutely killing it. And I would love in a couple of years to be able to go back and increase that by 10, 20, 30%, because they can afford it. They're minting money. But I can't. I'm locked into a 10-year lease with minimal increases just because they were new. The space was big, and I had some vacancy I wanted to fill. Right. And so I wish I could go back there and redo that. Yeah. So I encourage people, unless it's a really strong credit that you're just guaranteed that you're going to get paid the whole time, think about negotiating shorter leases, evaluating how well the business does, and then negotiate to win when their lease comes up in 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, interesting.
Anyway.
Yep, those are some good tips. When it comes to adding value in a commercial real estate investment, your lease negotiation is the biggest spot to do it. Hands down, every single time. You've got to read the lease. You've got to understand the lease. You've got to understand what your exposure is, their exposure is, and all of this will help you digest what a good lease renewal is going to be. We gave you some good tips today. Go out and implement them in the next lease renewal.
Hit us up with questions.
Yeah, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.